So we're coming on the air with breaking news from Georgia and the final stretch now for a case we've been talking about, you've been talking about, but you know who's done talking? The three men accused of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. That's because the defense is rested, and two of those defendants are not going to take the stand. We're going to take you live to the courtroom with closing arguments now gearing up for Monday. And if you knew the name Julius Jones before today, you've had millions of people in your company, including big-time celebrities. And tonight, that circle's getting even bigger, given the life-changing news for the man on death row, at least until today. The governor's almost literal last-minute commutation and what happens next for the inmate whose supporters say shouldn't be behind bars at all. Plus, are you sure the person you're getting fashion tips from on Instagram is a real person? I know, it's kind of weird we even had to ask that, but there's a reason. Our original exclusive on how virtual influencers are all over social media. You may even be following one right now. And Serena Williams wants answers on Peng Shuai. She is not buying this quote-unquote message that Chinese state media has on the female tennis star, and neither are tennis's top officials. So what happens next? We take you inside China for a closer look at this bizarre and scary story. Hey, I'm Hallie, and just within the last hour, as we were getting this show ready for air, we found out the defense rested its case in the trial of Ahmaud Arbery's killers. And here's why that's super interesting. It means we're not going to hear from Greg McMichael and William Bryan, the other two of three men charged with Arbery's murder. Now, we did hear from the other defendant, the one you see on your screen, who we now know will be the only one to testify after a second day of questioning for him, with the prosecution spending just hours and hours in cross-examination, trying to poke holes, trying to show Travis McMichael was inconsistent in what he told police, trying to dissect each moment where the three defendants could have chosen to stop chasing Arbery, but did not. McMichael still says he acted in self-defense. And you know that's not the only trial we're covering tonight. With that verdict up in Wisconsin for Kyle Rittenhouse still TBD tonight, but for who knows how much longer. Tom Yamas is going to join us with more on that in just a sec. But first, let's go to Ron Allen in Brunswick, Georgia. So, Ron, a lot of developments just in the last 60 minutes or so. The defense resting its case. Greg McMichael, William Bryan, not set to testify. And now Arbery's family coming out just within the last couple of minutes. They're saying they're really disappointed about this. What is your sense of the defense's strategy here?
Well, they put up Travis McMichael because they probably figured that was their best option. The only other defense witnesses were residents from the neighborhood who basically were talking about how they were concerned about crime. I think the general consensus out here is that McMichael did well for himself, if you want to believe what he has to say, that he didn't get rattled. He told his side of the story, and that's probably what the defense figured was the best they could do, better than Greg McMichael or better than William Bryan testifying. And so that's what they did. It was short, to the point. He made his point, and it's over. And now out here, there's a feeling of just sort of everybody's sort of digesting this. It kind of happened fairly quickly, and now everybody's trying to understand what does all this really mean. Where are we?
I hear you on that, Ron, that it did seem to happen fairly quickly. So talk about timeline, right? It sounds like closing arguments maybe Monday, and then the jury gets the case. Do we think they're going to be sequestered?
We don't know about that, but it's a very unusual time because we, of course, have the Thanksgiving holiday coming up. So the jury has a 3-day weekend. They get the case on Monday, and Thanksgiving is Thursday. So we think they'll get the case on Monday. The closing arguments are then. A lot of questions about what that could mean. Will the jury feel like they want to hurry up and get this done before the holiday? People are wondering if the judge might delay closing arguments or delay deliberations until after the holiday. It's a very unusual set of timing that happens. So we'll see. But again, you know, for the family you asked about earlier, Arbery's mother, who I just spoke to, said that she was disappointed that Greg McMichael didn't testify because he's a father. And as a mother, she wanted to hear what a father had to say about the taking of her son's life.
And I actually,
so
Ron,
that's where we are at this moment.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We actually, I think, have that sound from Ahmaud Arbery's mom. I want to see if we can play that here.
And at this point right here, hasn't said anything to you?
No, he has not said anything yet. No, ma'am.
Hasn't verbally threatened you?
Verbally, no.
Still running with his hands at his sides?
Directly towards me, yes, ma'am.
Hasn't pulled out a gun?
Hasn't seen a gun weapon yet, no, ma'am.
And hasn't shown you a weapon this entire time?
He has not.
Hasn't said a word the entire time?
Not one time.
All he's done is run away from you?
Run past me, yes, ma'am.
And you pulled out a shotgun and pointed it at him?
Running directly towards me, I was under the impression, and I was at this point, it was this guy can be a threat, and he is coming directly to me. Yes, I pointed the shotgun at him to deter him from coming directly to me, which was effective at that point there.
Obviously, Ron, that was not Ahmaud Arbery's mother. That was a moment from the cross-examination inside the courtroom of the trial. But it shows, I think, the thing that we've been talking about here, how the defense wanted Travis McMichael, it seems, on the stand because they thought, in your words, as you put it, that he was kind of their best shot here. But the prosecution really trying to poke holes in this argument.
They basically tried to say that Ahmaud Arbery was an innocent man, that he didn't have a weapon, that he didn't make any threats, that he didn't even say anything to the defendants, that he just kept running. And Travis McMichael was not under attack, and that he didn't have to fire in self-defense. And the prosecution inferred that they didn't even have to be out there in the first place, that they should have just stayed home and dialed 911 and let the police come to help. That's what what the case was. And so we'll see what how the jury decides about all that.
And Ron, I know you'll be out there for all of it, covering it for us here on NBC News Now. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being with us. We want to go to Wisconsin now, where it's not just the country on edge, but practically everybody in Kenosha, because our teams are saying things are getting more and more tense outside the courthouse as everybody's waiting for the verdict on Kyle Rittenhouse. A couple of protesters arrested for disorderly conduct last night. You can see some of the action that was going down. And then today, the Kenosha sheriff was trying to chill things out a little bit, bringing coffee, bringing what they're calling cookies for peace over to the courthouse. Police are saying, listen, this is not an unsafe situation. There's not a threat to public safety, but they're also not trying to take any chances out there. Remember, the governor sent the National Guard to town just in case. Our Tom Llamas is outside the courtroom for us now. And Tom, as we're on verdict watch here for yet another day, talk through what it's been like for you in Kenosha. I know some of the schools have closed, right?
That's right, Hallie. I'm going to talk about that in just a few moments, but we have some breaking news here I want to talk about. The jury has just wrapped up for day 3, so they now have been deliberating for about 23 hours, and still there is no verdict. As you mentioned, yes, 5 of the schools in the Kenosha School District have gone virtual just to be safe. I spoke with the sheriff earlier today. You mentioned he was handing out those cookies for peace. It's amazing. You have people behind me here that are shouting, that are fighting all day, really just, fighting with words.
Right.
And yet when those cookies came out, they all enjoyed those free cookies. So it kind of gives you a sense of where the temperature's at here. But as you mentioned, they are taking no chances. But again, that breaking news, the jury wrapping for a 3rd day, no verdict. They've been deliberating for about 23 hours so far. The only thing we know so far about this, Hallie, is that some of them wanted to revisit some of the moments captured on camera, and they wanted to look at the jury instructions again. That's all we know. We do know that the defense attorney, Mark Richards, in this case, he sort of was exasperated a little bit, just sort of frustrated because everyone wants an answer here. Everyone has been waiting for those 23 hours, including us here in the media, to find out what happens, especially Kyle Rittenhouse and the victims in this case as well. Hallie?
We're going to have to wait a little longer, it seems, Tom, since as you report, the jury is now done for the day. I got to get to some of the other news of the day. We have to talk about it, right? We'd be remiss if we didn't, that the judge reprimanded MSNBC over in court. Explain what happened here. I know there's a statement from NBC News on this, too.
Yeah, so I think we have a graphic here. We can put it up on the screen now. And this is the statement from our company, NBC News. And here's what they said. Last night, a freelancer received a traffic citation. While the traffic violation took place near the jury van, the freelancer never contacted or intended to contact the jurors during deliberations and never photographed or intended to photograph them. We regret the incident and will fully cooperate with the authorities on any investigation. That, again, from an NBC News spokesperson. Any member of MSNBC has now been banned from the courthouse for this trial. So that's one of the developments that happened today. But the bigger issue here, the thing that we're all watching, is when there's going to be a verdict in this building behind me.
100%. And that verdict watch picks up again first thing in the morning. Tom, thank you. We look forward to seeing more of your reporting from Kenosha on Top Story in a couple hours. Any minute now. Maybe while we're on the air, it's entirely possible that could happen. We could get an answer on whether Pfizer boosters are safe for all adults. Pfizer asked for that green light last week. Moderna asked for that for their shot yesterday. And some states are saying, listen, this cannot come too soon. For other states, they're saying it's already too late. A dozen of them have already said people can get boosters if they want to right now. The latest state to do that, Vermont. And that is a really interesting case study because of what you're seeing on the screen right here. It's the most vaccinated state in the country, but COVID is still spreading. I want to bring in our Kristen Dahlgren, who is in Vermont for us live tonight. And Kristen, the governor there has basically said, listen, we can't wait for Washington here. We've got to do this. We've got to move forward. Tell us more about that.
Right. He's not waiting for the FDA approval. He says that anybody who's eligible, who's 6 months out from the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, can go ahead and get it now. So approving those boosters for everyone as long as they meet those time constraints, because here in Vermont, the biggest surge since the pandemic began. Today, 517 new cases. That is the second highest total in the entire pandemic, the highest within the last week. So this is a state that's seeing a surge in spite of those huge vaccination numbers, Hallie.
I spoke with a doctor today who was telling me, listen, people, you can't take your eye off the ball when it comes to vaccinations, but boosters are also going to be really important. And by the way, so is the flu shot, right? As we talk about that piece of it, too. I know you've been having conversation with doctors there as well. I imagine it's much the same messaging in Vermont.
It is, and there's a few things going on here in Vermont. Look, we've got colder weather, and so we've got people inside more. Also, if you think about this state that got those vaccines really early on, well, now those people are beginning to see it waning. So I talked to one doctor about who are these people who are getting sick. Here's what he had to say.
The people who are getting sick now are a mixture of three things. One is the unvaccinated. Another are the people who are vaccinated but are medically ill, and so the vaccine can't protect them as well. And then the third, more rarely, are really unlucky people who, even though the rates of bad disease in them are low, just got the wrong hand of cards.
So again, the majority of the people getting sick at this point are the unvaccinated, a huge push to continue to keep those numbers going up. And the fear, of course, that this is a microcosm for the rest of the country as things cool down, as people elsewhere start to go inside. Hal.
Kristen Dahlgren live there in Vermont. Kristen, thank you for being on tonight. I really appreciate it. Some serious drama, some life-changing drama, and that is not an exaggeration, in Oklahoma this afternoon, where the governor stopped an execution just hours before it was supposed to happen. This is Julius Jones. Prosecutors say he killed Paul Howard back in 1999, but Jones says he's innocent. He's been on death row for 20 years. For that whole time, he said he was not the one who killed Howard. This case has caught fire. You might have heard about it. Kim Kardashian did. She's been talking about it. Same for Kerry Washington and Mandy Patinkin, Steph Curry, a ton of celebrities, a ton of sports stars, millions of people calling for this execution not to happen. And at almost the last minute, it ended up not. Listen to the reaction at the Oklahoma State Capitol when word came in that the governor was stepping in. That's the moment when the news came down there. In the crowd were students who had walked out in protest of the execution, some members of Jones's family, too. And yes, today is a obviously huge moment, an important moment for Jones, right? But he still may spend the rest of his life in prison. And you've got some folks wondering now why the governor didn't make his move earlier, because weeks ago, a parole board voted twice to commute Jones's sentence to life in prison with the possibility of parole. I want to bring in our legal analyst, Danny Savalos, to discuss. Danny, thank you for being here with us tonight. Listen, the victim's family says they believe Jones is guilty. Jones' family says there's just too many unanswered questions about this whole thing. And in the end, the governor ended up, agreeing with that. But do you have any sense to why it came down to just these final few hours here?
Oh, it's often the case that the governor, well, political creature in any state, has to weigh the political consequences of issuing clemency. And clemency can come in the form of an outright pardon or a reduction in sentence or commuting a sentence. But it's always a political decision, which is exactly why, Hallie, as I'm sure everyone has noticed, presidents don't issue pardons generally until the last few hours they are in office, when they are at least susceptible to political harm because they're leaving anyway. That's how controversial these decisions can be. So any executive, whether it's a governor or a president, weighs this decision very, very carefully in an effort at self-preservation.
So when you talk about that balance that a governor or a political leader might need to strike, when you look at the celebrities, the athletes, even that ABC documentary about this case, do you think, that made a difference, or was it more sort of the grassroots effort, those students that we talked about, the Oklahomans that made a difference here?
yes, I'm sure the media coverage of this had a huge impact on a governor who is thinking about his or her political future. Because after all, if you just look at the numbers, there are thousands upon thousands of requests for pardons and clemency at the state level and at the federal level, and a tiny fraction of them even get considered, and an even tinier fraction get granted. So I would argue that the decision a governor or an executive like the president makes to issue a pardon is often only partially based on the merits of the request, and also partially based on what can this do for me politically. Now, that may sound jaded, but it's just a reality of the decisions that are made either at the White House or a governor's house.
So Jones's family obviously celebrating this, but they also say it's not over yet. I want to play a little bit from what we heard from them today. Watch.
It's not what Julius deserves, you know. He's an innocent man, doesn't deserve another day in prison. But to know that he's going to live, where there's life, there's always hope.
What's your assessment, Danny, sort of professionally, given where you're looking at the appeals in this case, et cetera? Is it possible that he could end up out of prison at some point? And what would the timeline on that be?
Odds are it's a long shot.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I think people would be surprised that Jones's case involved an alibi. You would be amazed at how often juries convict in spite of alibi witnesses. They often just don't believe alibi witnesses, and if you were spending time with your mother or your family, they just think, come on, it's his mom. What mom wouldn't lie for her son? So this happens fairly often. Based on this evidence, this is not even that uncommon of a conviction where you have alibi evidence like this. So any appeal is always a long shot. It's always hard to convince an appeals court that there may be new evidence or that the jury got it wrong.
Danny Savalas, great to have you with us. Thank you. Appreciate it. Right now, it is a busy evening for President Biden over at the White House. That's because he's hosting the Canadian and Mexican leaders there. And we think we're going to see the three of them together sometime in the next few minutes. Things are running a little bit behind schedule, but we're obviously watching that. This is interesting because it's the first time these three leaders have gotten together in person in 5 years. President Biden is trying to reset the relationship with these countries after 4 years under former President Donald Trump. Peter Alexander is posted up at the White House. Peter, I have to pull back the curtain a bit for folks. You have been part of what's called the pool there today, right, which means you're one of the small group of reporters who's like in the room, running after the president, trying to get him to answer your questions, right? Talk to me about what you heard from him today and the news factor in these discussions here, because there's a lot of big issues at stake.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, Hallie, as you said, they're running behind just moments from now behind us inside the East Room of the White House. All three leaders are going to be together sort of formally for the first time in front of the cameras. And to give you a sense of some of the topics they'll be focusing on, you can see who else is in the room. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, Secretary Mayorkas, he's in charge of Homeland Security, and John Kerry, who oversees climate for this administration. So trade, obviously, security, and frankly, COVID and climate are high on the list of issues they're going to be discussing here. You noted this is the first time these three leaders have been together since 2016. Among the issues that they said they'd be focusing on are the ones I identified, but one not being discussed and wasn't discussed when I was in the room, they let you in just before the formal meeting begins, is a policy right now that exists that requires some of those migrants who are seeking asylum in the U.S. to stay in Mexico. So the bottom line, the Remain in Mexico policy, they call it. Hallie, as you know as well as anybody right now, there's some real challenges for this administration. In the Biden administration, the White House knows that it needs Mexico's help right now as it relates to the challenges of migration. It needs them to sort of stem the flow of migrants coming up from Central America and also to house tens of thousands of them before they enter the United States. So
there's this tension point, Peter, as it relates to migration, obviously. There's also this potential tension point on the side of Canada with Prime Minister Trudeau on electric cars, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So this has to do with a tax credit that's included in that Build Back Better, that larger $1.75 trillion social program and climate plan that Congress is discussing right now. And what it would do if it's passed is basically give Americans a tax credit for the purchase of an electric vehicle that is made in the United States. Well, that's infuriating Canada right now because they say that'll hurt Canadian electric vehicle producers, manufacturers of cars across the border. Frankly, Tesla and others in the U.S. say that they could be harmed by this as well because it had to be companies that received some government funding here. So that's one of the issues. The president, when he was pressed on this earlier, Hallie said, you know, it's a topic that they'll perhaps discuss, but that there wasn't a lot more to say about it given the fact that it still hadn't passed through Congress.
Right. I mean, the ball is sort of in the Capitol's court here on this. And then, Peter, before I let you go, you asked what I think is, listen, this is all interesting stuff, but I think as we look ahead to what's going on with the Olympics in 2022, this discussion about a possible diplomatic boycott, right, because of Chinese human rights abuses, et cetera. Right. You made some real news with President Biden today, no?
Yeah, he made the news, as it were, right? I was trying to press him on it.
Okay, you were the vessel for the news, Peter. I hear you on that.
I was keeping with our electrical vehicle conversation. I was the vehicle for his making news here. But the bottom line was we tried to get him on this a while ago because there's been some reporting that the U.S. was considering a diplomatic boycott. So I asked of the Winter Olympics to take place in February in Beijing, China. So I asked that question to the president point blank during his visit with Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. I said, is it something that you would support, a diplomatic boycott, which would mean that government officials, high-profile U.S. officials, would not go, but that U.S. athletes would still go. And he said it's something we're considering. Jen Psaki, the press secretary, she was asked about it later because obviously it turned a lot of heads among reporters. This would be a big deal. Some Republicans have frankly been calling for a full boycott. Tom Cotton of Arkansas, as you know, Hallie, among them right now. They say the U.S. needs to go further in sort of punishing China for its human rights abuses.
Our news vessel and chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander live for us tonight from the North Lawn of the White House. Peter, great work today. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate you. Thanks. Coming up on the show, we know scams are meant to cheat people out of money, right? But what about their homes? A fake landlord scam in Detroit is evicting people, literally kicking them to the curb, and it's catching the attention of a lot of folks. That's next. Lawmakers in Detroit are really upset. They are furious, and they are saying something's got to change now. Why? To stop a housing scam that's been affecting people who live in Detroit for at least 10 years or so. And here's the deal. Fake landlords, they're taking money from people who thought they were actually making payments on their home, but they weren't. Turns out the home they thought they bought, that they were paying off, was not actually theirs at all. Zincle Esamoah has the story.
$15,000. That's how much June Walker says she paid for her house.
2 months after I make the last payment, I get this eviction notice.
Now she's been told she doesn't own it. Tenants like Walker allege they've been scammed by individuals renting or selling properties they actually do not own.
Sometimes the real owner shows up with the police and says, "What are you doing in my home?"
Are there consequences for individuals who scam?
Not that I've seen.
Initially reported on by NBC's Aaron Einhorn in collaboration with Outlier Media. Cases include scammers collecting rent on foreclosed houses, renting vacant houses, or scammers filing false deeds and making fake sales.
There was no glass.
In Walker's case, she says she entered a rent-to-own lease agreement in 2019 with an option to buy. A big milestone for the 65-year-old, previously experiencing homelessness and battling drug addiction.
I was running around the house all happy, calling everybody, hey, I made the last payment.
She says upon move-in, there was no furnace or water heater and a basement filled with sewage.
How high was the water in this basement?
Okay, take a look at the side of this.
Oh, wow, that's like an exact example.
So she renovated the home with money from savings and disability. Walker says she earned about $700 a month and paid $550 a month in rent to a man named Derek who said he owned the house, though his last name was redacted from a copy of the property deed he gave Walker.
When did things start going wrong?
2 months after I made the final payment.
Walker made her final payment April 2021, but when she asked for the original deed, Derek eventually stopped responding. He was not the owner. Wayne County documents show RHMS Group bought the house for $8,500 at an auction in 2017. The group sold to Bacafe LLC, which ultimately filed Walker's eviction notice. In response, the lawyer for the company said, in part, the companies do not know who Derek is, and, quote, he had no authority from our clients to lease out or sell the property. The Detroit Police Department saying, in part, scammers are often not held accountable because they, quote, use fake identities, do not provide written leases, and use a middleman to commit a crime. Now, the grandmother of two faces virtual eviction hearings. But it's not just her. As more houses face foreclosure, Phillips says more tenants are at risk.
In the biggest way, it's hit those communities that are more on the lower income.
35% of Detroit residents live below the poverty line, leaving traditional pathways to home ownership out of reach, according to housing experts. Unless scammers are identified and prosecuted, advocates like Phillips say nothing will change. In response to the allegations, Wayne County Prosecutor's Office said in part that they sympathize with Ms. Walker's case, but that the county's mortgage and deed fraud unit did not receive a warrant request for this case. Walker's case currently remains in civil court. Now, with the federal eviction moratorium over, tens of thousands in Detroit are set to go through eviction proceedings, including June Walker, awaiting her final verdict in January.
Well, when I talked with the attorney last night, she said that we just needed to survive today.
Do you feel like you survived?
I know we have. But it's not just about me. I think and wonder how many people have been through this. How many people just in Detroit alone have been played like that, man.
Zinkley joins us now. And Zinkley, we got to give a shout out to Aaron Einhorn, our colleague here at NBC, who did this story initially, got the attention of lawmakers who are now trying to actually do something and solve this for people like the woman you interviewed, right? Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So right now, we've heard from the Michigan Attorney General, who actually reissued consumer alerts for housing scams just this week. That was in part in response to the reporting of Aaron Einhorn, as you said. And that's in an effort to further protect consumers. She also encouraged any victims of housing scams to come forward. As we heard in the report, if you don't report it, law enforcement keeps saying we cannot track it. We also heard from Rashida Tlaib, who told us she wants lawmakers to act with a sense of urgency. Of course, that's something we're going to have to see if they deliver on, Hallie.
Zinkley Esoma, thank you so much for that reporting. Appreciate it. Coming up in the show, a new development in the Colorado police shooting of Elijah McClain. The city of Aurora settling, finally, with the family of the 23-year-old black man. We'll tell you for how much. And some serious star power, again demanding answers over where exactly a major Chinese tennis star is. What Serena Williams is now saying about Peng Shuai later on. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Justice Department now charging 2 Iranians with interfering in the 2020 election. They're accused of a disinformation campaign to make it look like the election results could not be trusted. Number 2, $15 million. That is how much the city of Aurora, Colorado is reportedly paying the family of Elijah McClain to settle their civil lawsuit. You probably remember McClain's name. He died after a very violent confrontation with police in 2019. A grand jury has indicted the officers, 3 of them, and the 2 paramedics involved in his death. Number 3, Henry Ruggs heading back to court next week. He's the former Raiders receiver who was involved in that drunk driving crash that killed a Las Vegas woman last month. He missed a court-ordered alcohol test, and one condition of his bail is Ruggs is not allowed to drink alcohol. Number 4, New Delhi's air pollution has gotten so bad that officials there have actually ordered a lockdown in the capital. That means schools, construction sites, factories, all shutting down. Smog in the city is higher than it's ever been. Officials are trying to figure out how to fix this. Number 5, a NASA astronaut, Jessica Watkins. She's heading to space, and she is making history along the way. When Watkins launches to the International Space Station next year, she will become the first black woman ever to be a part of the space station crew. Go, Jessica. Now to other news here on the show, including new video showing a Pennsylvania teen had his hands up when he was shot and killed by state police late last year. Now, his family is saying there needs to be an independent investigation. We're talking about Christian Hall, who was standing on the ledge of a highway overpass in northeastern PA when police got there. They tried to persuade him to get down, but they saw he had a gun and backed away. Hall was 19 and had been struggling with depression. Vaughn Hilliard is following that story for us out of Pennsylvania. So, Vaughn, we know that Hall's parents are releasing this video now. Why now, right? What are they saying about sharing this?
Hallie, the parents said that they wanted to shed light on what they say was the unjustified killing of their son. They say that their son placed that phone call to police officers reporting a possible suicide. Of course, that individual who made that call was Christian Hall himself, who you see there on the ledge of that highway. They said that he was crying out for help, but instead what ultimately happened was 90 minutes later, police shot him dead. Take a listen to part of our interview with their mother.
He called 911. He was looking for help. You don't call 911 and expect that you'd be shot. I know that they did talk to him, but don't end it with bullets. That should not be the end.
This was a difficult encounter, Hallie. We are talking about Christian Hall, who over the course of 90 minutes was told by police 40 times to drop his weapon, and ultimately he came within 70 feet of officers, and that is when officers say that they were justified in the shooting of Christian Hall.
What are police saying now? Have they said anything since the family released this?
We are waiting. NBC News has reached out to the DA, and we have not heard back from the police either.
This is, as you talk about, this is a complicated discussion around mental health, too. And I look at the statistic, right, that says that untreated mental illnesses are, people who have those are 16 times more likely to be killed during a police encounter. That's according to the Treatment Advocacy Center. Can you talk about what his parents said about whether Hall was getting treatment?
His family says that he was in between counselors at the time of this, and that study that you speak of really speaks to that national conversation within police departments about to what extent do these officers seek out or get that training when it comes to an individual dealing with a mental health crisis. In this particular situation, this was a young man who called 911 reporting a possible suicide, which was himself here. He was in this video, we should make clear, he was holding a pellet gun, but police say that they believed that it was a semi-automatic pistol, and it was not evident until later on that it was a pellet gun. For the family, they say that this was an unjustified killing, and when you look at this video, it's very tough here when it was a situation in which their son stood within 70 feet of those officers before losing his life.
Ron, I appreciate you joining us with this reporting. I know you're going to have more later on tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern on Top Story. Thank you. I want to note here that NBC News was provided all police dash cam shooting, including the moment that the district attorney had previously blurred out that showed the moment Hall was shot. We're not showing that on air now. You can see it on NBCnews.com if you want. Now to another story we're covering tonight, and you see it there on screen. Florida versus Biden. You could also call it the Biden-DeSantis beef. He's the governor, of course, of Florida, and there's a new escalation in this whole thing tonight. That is because today, the governor signed 4 bills, you're watching him do it, limiting vaccine mandates. It's the first state to sign a law now going against sort of the president's order that employees of big companies need to have the vaccine. If employers do choose to put a vaccine in place for their employees in Florida, they face a $10,000 fine if they're a small business, $50,000 fine for bigger ones. And it's important to note the backdrop here, right? DeSantis, the governor in Florida, has talked about wanting to be able to put freedoms in place for people in Florida. There's also the political piece to this. There's a lot of speculation he may be looking at a run for president himself in 2024. Pete Williams is here with more. Pete, let me move my gigantic laptop out of the way. I'm sorry. It's totally in the space here. A lot of states have filed lawsuits here, right, challenging the president's vaccine mandate. How do you see this new legislation that Governor DeSantis has signed fitting into this battle?
Well, as a direct matter, it doesn't really matter because Florida has already sued the federal government over the OSHA restrictions. And all those cases that were in 11 different circuit courts have now all been piled together and consolidated in the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals in Ohio. And that's where they sit. And just today, by the way, a corporation in Ohio said, let's just get on with it. Let's just go ahead and have a hearing before the full circuit court instead of going through the 3-judge panel thing. And the court has asked the government to respond by next week. Okay. Well, so Florida had already sued over that OSHA restriction.
But what do you do if you're a business in Florida who, let's say you're a big business and you would like your employees to get the vaccine?
So the law passed today by Florida looks a lot more muscular than it really is because you can still require your employees to have a vaccine, but you have to give them exceptions. You have to allow for medical exceptions if they're pregnant, if they have religious exceptions, and if they say, well, you know, we were already wearing protective equipment. Now, the OSHA, the federal OSHA thing says something similar about allowing exceptions. This Florida thing just allows a few more. The other thing is a Florida business doesn't get sanctioned under the law. It doesn't get punished. It can't be fined unless it fires somebody for refusing to follow the vaccine restrictions. So it's, you know, it puts them in a hard place, but it's not quite as draconian as it looks.
So there's also this discussion, we've been covering this so much, as you know, like vaccine mandates in schools, right? And this new law means that students and parents can now sue a school district if they want to, if that school district says, we're going to put a vaccine mandate in place. Listen, should school districts be concerned about that, right? Anything that opens them up to more liability?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, there's no school in Florida now that requires it. So no school is in danger of being sued. Secondly, if you do sue, you can't sue for money. You can't sue for damages. You can ask the court to declare that the school is in violation of the state restriction, but that's all.
What does that do?
Well, I mean, it stops the school from doing it. So that's really all you can do. And then the school would be liable for court costs and attorney's fees. But you can't sue for damages. So, but still, I mean, I think schools, it's an extra reason for schools not to require masks right now.
That's super interesting. Pete Williams, thank you for coming down and breaking it down for us.
Pleasure. Thanks for
here on
moving
our
the
set.
furniture around.
No, of course. Anything for you, Pete. We want to be good hosts. Thank you. Serena Williams, the latest big-name tennis star to tweet out support for missing Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai, who accused a former Chinese vice premier of sexual assault and has since basically vanished. Serena Williams tweeting partly, "I hope she's safe and found as soon as possible. This must be investigated, and we must not stay silent. Sending love to her and her family during this incredibly difficult time." So tonight we're taking you inside China because there's another twist in this case. Chinese state media is showing off what it says, what it claims is an email from her to the Women's Tennis Association in which Peng Shuai, again, allegedly says, according to Chinese state media, that the allegations were not true and that the WTA should stop meddling. The chairman of the Women's Tennis Association does not buy that.
It's of great concern to us that we have not been able to reach her. We've used every option that we know of today and followed up on every lead that's been given to us. But to date, we haven't been able to reach her.
Janice Mackey-Freyer is joining us now from Beijing Tonight Live. Janice, it's great to see you. Talk about this email thing as it relates to Peng Shuai here, right? Because it doesn't seem it doesn't seem to pass the smell test, I think, to a lot of folks who have looked at it, no?
A lot of folks would agree with that assessment. If we look at how it's been handled here, when the post first appeared, it was deleted within moments. This was the post that was found on Peng's social media account. It lasted about 20 minutes, and it was scrubbed presumably by censors, and her presence on the internet has been largely scrubbed since. So you have one of China's biggest sports stars, and her name is unsearchable on the internet. So the censorship is one part of it. State media is one of those levers that's pulled here to shape and to control the narrative. So when that email appeared on state-controlled social media accounts, immediately there's skepticism about its veracity. Not helped by the fact, Hallie, that it was posted as a screen grab, and mid-sentence you see a typing cursor, which suggests that the image was taken while the note was still being composed. So part of the reason why the WTA is saying that it doesn't believe that Peng wrote the email or certainly didn't mean it.
She has, totally vanished here, Janice. And I wonder, as an American reporter living in China, as you talk about the censorship piece of this and how hard it is for people in China to get access to any information about Peng Shuai, are you seeing that same thing, right? Like when you go on to the Chinese version of Google, nothing for you?
Well, you can go onto Weibo, which is the popular microblogging site. You punch in her name. There are traces of her on the internet, but you try to search her accounts and you can't. The comments had already been disabled. So much has been purged over the last couple of weeks. And again, there is this official policy of silence. The Chinese Tennis Association won't comment. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs won't address Peng or the allegations, and they're telling us because it's not a question of diplomacy. You have Zhang Gaolin, who retired in 2018, and he's not reachable for comment. And of course, nobody knows where Peng Shuai is. Sexual harassment and assault have been rarely broached publicly in China until the Me Too movement started around 2018. But even then, there have been very few cases that have reached the courts, and even then, the women involved are often targeted for intimidation. But these allegations, Hallie, it's unprecedented for them to hit at really one of the pinnacles of Communist Party power. So in that sense, it is unprecedented, and the stakes feel much higher.
You have to think that like groundswell, that movement that we're seeing from celebrities, all over the world of tennis is just going to continue to build and build until we get more answers on this. Janice Mackey-Freyer, it is so great to see you live from Beijing. Thank you so much for your great reporting. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, Hallie.
Sure. Okay, so question. Why were vials labeled smallpox found in a freezer at a Pennsylvania lab? I don't know, and neither does the FBI. There's now an investigation into that. And your favorite influencer on social media, they may not even be real, and we really mean it. We're going to have more on tonight's Original coming up. Influencers, they're just like us, right? Maybe not. Some of them aren't even real. They're computer generated avatars with cult followings. I'm going to break it down for you in the Original. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Starting with maybe smallpox in Philadelphia. What? Our Northeast Bureau reporting somebody found a vial labeled smallpox at a Merck facility in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and nobody apparently knows why. We know this virus got eradicated in the 70s, and it was so deadly only 2 labs in the world are allowed to have doses of this virus. Those are in Atlanta and Russia. So the CDC says, yeah, they are definitely looking into this. We've got 2 stories coming out of our Midwest Bureau today. In Wisconsin, parents are fighting with the Kettle Moraine School District over gender transition policies. The 2 sets of parents who filed a lawsuit say they do not agree with letting students change their name or gender pronouns at school without the permission of parents. They say that's a violation of their constitutional rights. And in Detroit, John Deere union workers finally got a deal after all that bargaining. They're getting 10% raises this year and 20% for the rest of their 6-year contract. That means 10,000 plus employees can go back to work now after being on strike for something like a month. Now, we want to bring you today's Original, a story you're not going to see anywhere else. And let's start with this. Just today, at least 8 states have said they're investigating Instagram's harmful effects on younger people, right? The impact that social media has on kids and teens. It's part of a bigger conversation we've all been having on this topic. So there's a growing trend on social media that we wanted to talk about that has some experts asking questions. And their concerns, looking at 2 words, virtual influencers. Like if you look at the screen right now, can you tell who's fake and who's real on your screen? Some of these influencers have millions of followers, major brand deals. They've captivated Gen Zers. They're not real people. We had to find out more, so check out our Original for tonight. That's Lil Miquela and Bermuda and Emma, social media stars with millions of followers, sharing selfies with friends, posting funny videos, typical teen stuff. Except these aren't teens.
Hey, wanna be friends? Who does that?
They're not even human. They're computer-generated robots, virtual influencers with plenty of fans.
As soon as I clicked on her page, I think I was just first obviously confused, but then upon just looking at it, it was just so cool to me.
Carla Montgomery has been following Lil Miquela for years.
She lives as a robot in our world, and I think, her skincare routine, she's like, well, sorry guys, it's just WD-40. I think it's just super unique.
And super realistic.
In looking at Little Miquela, it's quite interesting.
Carl McDormand studies human-computer interaction and explains the theory of the uncanny valley. This graph explains what that is. When a person looks at a series of virtual faces, they feel comfortable as those faces become more and more real-looking up to a certain point, right before they look 100% human. That's when people start feeling uncomfortable. And it's that cute to creepy reaction that researchers call the uncanny valley. But something else is happening with these virtual influencers.
People get used to characters. So if they're interacting with a particular virtual influencer frequently, then it may have been uncanny at some point, but over time they'll get used to it.
The interactions can be entertaining, but researchers worry about the risk.
I think there are general concerns about social media kind of shaping young minds and young brains. And I think the concerns would be even greater with the digital influencers because they're exploiting the human interface, which is to say they look like people. And so this gives them a lot of leverage. It can be designed very specifically to be liked, to be credible, and so on. And that's a kind of new danger that we haven't seen before in society.
These influencers creating relationships, sharing stories, appearing in the real world alongside real people, like virtual star Ray showing up on this magazine cover. So if you look, can you tell who's real and who's digital?
It questions the line of reality versus virtual reality.
Virginia Tech professor Donna Hertalik thinks these virtual influencers are becoming more popular because of their targeted approach toward younger audiences, which can really pay off. Influencer marketing overall is a huge industry, with brands expected to spend up to $15 billion on it by next year. And these digital stars are coming for a bigger piece of that pie, making money from sponsored posts, concerts, even virtual reality video games. Lil Michaela reportedly made more than $11 million last year.
It's translated now to somebody they can relate to, someone that looks like them, talks like them, feels like them, and then them translating to be an influencer for these young communities.
There's a company behind that looking to sell something, right? Like this comes back to like branding and influencing at its very core.
Absolutely. And it is the wizard behind the curtain that is playing like a puppeteer with these virtual beings. You're not only getting into it, you're getting into, who they're friends with, who they're not. And then, by the way, I'm using this product and that product.
One of the companies creating virtual influencers emphasized it's a new way to storytell, but did not respond to a longer list of questions from us. Another gave us a lengthy statement from its CEO, saying in part, the next generation of young people who can smell whether something seems authentic or not will be the main players in the age of the metaverse. Adding, virtual humans are a mirror to humans to teach us what we really should treasure.
What do parents need to know about the rise of virtual influencers online?
Talk to your kids and find out what's going on. Get involved with them. We need to be informed as parents and go a little bit beyond just the birds and bees these days, because there's a lot more influencers and impact out there that could really change the future of our children based on how they're being conditioned.
What's also interesting here, and one of the things that Professor Hertalik and I talked about, is how there are really positives as it relates to education about this. Like, for example, might you see virtual influencers in the classroom trying to teach kids lessons, trying to be involved in more of that educational sphere? We're going to watch that and see how that unfolds. A lot of people really interested. Coming up here on the show, we're taking you inside that royal visit to Egypt. Prince Charles and his wife are in Cairo, talking religion and the environment. Our Raf Sanchez is there too, and he's got the backstory on their first tour since the pandemic started. Let's get to the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And there's a bunch of attention that Prince Charles is getting today, since he's taken on more and more responsibilities to help out the Queen. Don't know if you heard, but her health has been a little problematic lately. He is in Egypt with Camilla on the second part of his first big foreign trip since the pandemic started. Today in Cairo, he talked with top leaders there on religion and the environment, since Egypt is going to be hosting a big climate summit next year. It's a little controversial because human rights groups are worried about big, noisy environmental protests like the ones that happened in Glasgow in Scotland during the climate summit this year. Why? Because demonstrations are outlawed in Egypt. We also saw Queen Elizabeth back home making her first official engagement since missing a National Remembrance Day service on Sunday. She's canceled, more than a few events over the past couple of months, and people are starting to wonder about Charles's legacy, Charles's role if he does end up starting to rule soon. I want to bring in Raf Sanchez, who's been following this royal tour in the Middle East and has our backstory tonight. Raf, good evening. Thank you so much for being with us, my friend.
Hey, great to be with you, Hallie.
So pull back the curtain a little bit.
Traffic.
Oh, go. Talk to me. Did you make the hit in time? Because I was going to say, you are trying to keep up with this motorcade. You're in traffic in Cairo. Pull back the curtain for people. How you keep up with Prince Charles and with covering the royals, when you're out on a trip like this.
Yeah, exactly. Cairo traffic, not your friend when you're on deadline. There are 20 million people in this city, a lot of cars. You might be able to hear some of them behind me. Unlike Prince Charles, we don't have sirens. We can't race our way through. We did get to the pyramids on time today. But the other thing is Egypt, as you were saying, is an authoritarian state. This is a difficult country to operate in as a journalist. That is especially true if you are a local Egyptian journalist. We in the international international press have a slightly easier time. What we found today was when we got to the pyramids, Egyptian authorities were actually pretty happy, pretty excited about this visit by Prince Charles, by Camilla. And so we were pretty free to roam around, to go where we want. But that is not always the case when you're reporting here in Egypt, Hallie.
The other thing, too, is you're reporting on a family, right, the royal family, that is sort of notorious for having an extremely controlled like public perception, right? Like they crack down on that a lot. We know that. We know that it is very sort of difficult, I think, to be able to get in and do sort of decent sourcing there. Talk to me about that dynamic, right? When you're reaching out for comment, when you're covering, Prince Charles when he's out on a trip like this, who are you talking to? And how easy is it to give information on stuff like this?
Yeah, the royal beat is a really strange one. Hallie, you've covered multiple U.S. presidents. You know, when the president walks by, you can just shout a question at him. He doesn't always answer it, right? But everybody accepts that that's part of the give and take between the press and the president. That is not the case with the royal family. It is considered extremely rude, very poor form to pepper their royal highnesses with questions as they go past. And part of the reason for that is this weird position that they occupy, right? They represent the British state. They're here in Egypt at the request of the British government. But if you try to ask them a substantial policy question, like about human rights, they're not in a position to answer you because they don't control any of the policy. And so it leads to this very weird situation where we see a lot of the royals as reporters, but we don't actually hear that much from them.
It is interesting, and I have to say, like, I cheer on your peppering of the questions, Raph. I know they're not going to answer and that it's considered rude, but I love that you try. Thank you. Thank you for being on with us tonight. Night 2 of our show here on NBC News Now. Raph Sanchez, this is Hallie Jackson now. We're going to be right back here tomorrow for night 3. Same time, same place. More coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.